Fairbrook here from VidGamiac.com. Here we are today in yet another visual novel in the form of The Flower Shop Summer in Fairbrook, and we're going to be doing our first playthrough. So before we get started, just like with any other playthrough, we're going to head into preferences and we're going to adjust some settings. Make sure you go over to skip and make sure you set that to all messages, and then go to after choices and make sure you set that to keep skipping. Crank the text speed and auto forward sliders all the way to the right, and then hit return to head back to the main menu. Then go to Start Game in order to start up the game. You're going to want to hit right bumper to start fast forwarding. The game should auto stop whenever you need to make a choice. I will have the choices listed in the margins, so if you want a text guide, you can use that to follow along. But picking the right choices is going to be very important in this game, as every single correct choice is going to add to your relationship status. And by the end of the game, you definitely want to make sure you max that out with every single character possible. Once we get to here, we are going to be introduced to the main gimmick of this visual novel, which is going to be the farming minigame. There isn't going to be a ton to do your first time around, so just make sure you try to get rid of as many weeds as you can. So just make sure you keep clicking on the weeds and keep clicking clean until you run out of time. Once you do, you should have completed your first farm session and be good for an achievement. It's going to be called It Begins for 80 gamer score. Once you wrap that up, it's going to be back to the traditional visual novel portion of the game. You are going to be introduced to the rest of the main cast, including all of the other girls that you can date. This game is basically going to be a hybrid between a farming and a dating sim. Once you wrap up that part of the visual novel, you're going to get back to the farm. Again, there's not much you can do, so might as well continue weeding. So just keep weeding until you run out of time, and then it's going to be back to the visual novel portion. It's going to be during the third farm segment where you're given your first crop seeds. I recommend skipping planting them for now and just sticking to weeding, and this will make things a little bit easier later on. So just keep weeding, and then once you run out of time, you're going to get your first weekly schedule. So in addition to covering the first playthrough in this guide, we're also going to be using this first playthrough as a time saver for any subsequent playthroughs, and the key to that is going to be setting up the weekly schedule right. So once you get your first weekly schedule, which is going to be the one with 11 weeks left, what you want to do is you want to make sure you go to Monday, make sure you set that to running, and then every subsequent day until Friday, you want to make sure you staircase your way down. So Tuesday is going to be flower shop, Wednesday is going to be library, Thursday is going to be stay home, and Friday is going to be relax. For Saturday, you want to make sure you pick running for this first week. What we're going to do every subsequent week is we're going to move the Saturday event down one, rotating between the middle four. We'll cover a little bit more of that later. But the reason we are setting it up like this is so we can even out our stats and get the most out of every single stat by the end of the game. So once that's done, we're going to transition over to the next farm part. Again, I'd recommend just weeding for this part. Make sure you don't plant any crops quite just yet. You want to take this early game to try to clear as much space on the field as you can. Then it's going to be back to the visual novel portion for a bit, so make sure you get through that. And then as soon as you make your one and only choice for this intermediary, you're going to get back to some more farming. And again, just make sure you stick to weeding. Once you wrap up this farm segment, you're going to move to the second day of the weekly schedule, and then what's going to happen is you're going to be introduced to the flower shop girl again, and make sure you get through the visual novel portion. Then you're going to get this option, which is going to give you access to the seed shop. Make sure you go to buy something. Now, the key to doing well during the farming segments of the game is to make sure you invest in crops that have a high return on investment. So, in other words, you want to make sure you stick to strawberries or blackberries. Make sure you buy whatever's in stock. After you buy your first one, you should be good for the shopping achievement for 80 gamer score. And from there, just go for broke on whatever amount of strawberries or blackberries you can buy. And then once you run out of money, just exit the shop and it's time to head back to the farm. All right, now that we have some worthwhile crops to plant, what you want to do is want to make sure you try to plant as many as you can. Make sure you keep an eye on the workday clock at the bottom of the screen. Once it reads 11 a.m., you want to use the last hour of the day to water your plants, and you do so by hitting the X button. Then we have some more visual noveling to do at the library, and then once that wraps up, we are going to be back on the farm. So it's going to be right here where I'm going to lay out the basic hierarchy of farming priorities. Whenever you start a farming segment, the first thing you want to do is you want to make sure you kill any parasites. They're going to be the plants that have any bugs on them. Make sure you take care of them because you do not want to lose any money on plants that are going to rot. Then what you want to do after that is try to harvest any ripe crops. So any crops that have the dollar sign on them are going to be crops that are going to be ready to be picked and sold. And basically you're going to pick them and then turn them in for a profit. The third thing you want to do, if you have time, is to plant any crops that you have. Again, try to stick to the cash crops in the form of strawberries or blackberries, and make sure you plant them in any space that you can. And if you have time after that, what you want to do is you want to make sure you weed any weeds that are around, because the more space you can clear on your farm, the more plants you can plant later. And of course, that is going to be super helpful. Regardless of what you do, you always want to make sure you spend the last hour of the workday watering your plants. So keep an eye on the workday clock at the bottom of the screen. As soon as it reads 11 a.m., you want to make sure you use that to water your plants. And you're going to do that with the X button. The only time you don't want to water your plants is if you are completely out of crops and there's nothing but weeds and empty spots left on the plot. Other than that, we're going to cover the goal of the farming segment, which is to try to make as close as to $1,000 as we can without going over by the time we get to 3 weeks left. So make sure you keep an eye on that cash counter in the upper right and make sure it doesn't go over 1,000, but you want to try to get as close to 1,000 as possible. Then we're going to be back to a visual novel portion, so make sure you get through that, and then it's going to be back to the farm. Now that we have the basics covered, you should be able to do every farming segment by yourself without any advice. Remember to stick to the hierarchy of farming priorities. However, you are free to adjust things as you see fit. The farming segments in this game are going to be randomly generated, so it's going to be up to you to adjust things if need be. But other than that, you are going to want to definitely try your best to stick to that list. All right, once we get to 10 weeks left, the game is going to increase drastically in terms of complexity, and the big reason for that is because of the game's random stat distribution. So to try to simplify things as best we can, basically the game is going to have two stats that you're going to worry about. We've already briefly touched on the relationship status, which is going to increase by picking the right visual novel choice regarding certain characters. But in addition to that, you're going to have your character stats, which are going to increase depending on what events you do during the week. So the reason we tried to do a different event every day of the week is to try to level up all of our character stats as evenly as possible. In addition to that, we are only able to talk to certain characters during their corresponding events. So we also need to make sure we keep the variety in our schedule in order to get to these certain conversations with the characters in order to level up their relationship status with us. Now, the downside to this is the amount we gain per stat is going to be completely randomly generated. So that's also going to mean the conversations that we have with certain characters will also appear randomly and in non-sequential order. Because of that, we can't really give you a list on which choices to pick in which order, as the order is going to change from playthrough to playthrough because of the random nature of the stats. So what we're going to do is we're going to place this answer key right here containing the list of all of the correct visual novel choices and their corresponding character. And what you want to do is you want to make sure you copy this down, and whenever you get a visual novel choice with a character, you want to make sure you figure out which character it is, and then you want to make sure you try to find the correct answer on this list. So, back to the weekly schedule. As mentioned during the previous week, every single time you get a new weekly schedule, what you want to do is want to make sure you leave Monday through Friday alone, and you want to make sure you adjust the Saturday going one down, and you want to make sure you keep rotating between the middle 4 events. So, that's going to be everything from running all the way down to stay home. And then from here on out, what you are going to need to do is going to be pretty straightforward, albeit random. So make sure you just keep up on your farming. Remember to follow that list of hierarchies and keep up with the amount of money you need by the time you get to 3 weeks left. If you ever get to a visual novel choice, make sure you just look it up in the answer key on what you need to pick. And then whenever you are in the store, make sure if you have money, make sure you invest in strawberries or blackberries. I recommend never buying more than a combination of 20 of both. The reason for that is you don't want to have more plants that you can reasonably plant on your farm. So make sure you don't go over 20 total seeds in your inventory. Then just keep this up until you get to the next weekly schedule. And then every time you get one of these, just make sure you adjust the Saturday going down one until you get to the bottom, which is going to be stay home. And then once you get to the week after that, just make sure you go back to the top of the list and then just keep working your way down until you get to 3 weeks left. All the meanwhile, you're going to want to keep an eye on your cash sum. Remember, your goal is to get as close to 1,000 as you can without going over. So make sure you be very careful, especially if you are doing well in the farm and making a ton of cash. Make sure you spend your leftovers at the shop so you don't go over the 1,000. As for the other things you want to make sure you keep in mind, I recommend keeping an eye on your character stats. You want to try to aim for high 60s, low 70s in these stats. You don't really have any control over it because, again, the game's random stat distribution. So hopefully you do have some good luck with the game's RNG. But if you can get those numbers in your favor, it's going to save you a lot of headache in the subsequent playthroughs. So make sure you do keep that in mind. So that should be the basic rundown of the 4 major gameplay types: the visual novel, the farm, the store, and the weekly schedule. Because the game is random, it's not going to be really worth pointing out anything for the rest of the playthrough, especially in terms of specifics. All you have to do is just make sure you use these general tips to try to get through the game as best you can and hope that the RNG is going to be in your favor for those stat-related things. Now, as you approach the mark that is going to be 3 weeks left, make sure you are good on your money. Make sure you do not go over 1,000, but the closer you are to 1,000, the better. So I recommend anywhere from 900 to 990. And then once you get your money in order, make sure you get to the 3 weeks later schedule. I highly recommend making a save before anything else. So make sure you hit that start button and make sure you save the game. And you want to make sure you save it in slot number 1. We will be referring to this save quite a bit in subsequent playthroughs. Hopefully your stats are all good too. Recommend anything from the high 60s to low 70s. Make sure things aren't too low, but you also want to make sure things aren't too high. Now, all things considering, it's going to be now that we're going to go for our first ending. So what you want to do is want to make sure you pick relax for every single day of the week. So make sure you pick relax for all 6 days. Then hit right bumper to start fast forwarding. Once you get to your first farm segment, make sure you cash in on any crops that you have left. And you should be over 1,000 hopefully at this point. If not, just keep playing the farm segment like normal, but this time you want to shoot for over 1,000. And once you get over 1,000 money, feel free to just hit the Y button to skip the rest of the farm parts in the game. Then you're going to get to 2 weeks left, which is going to be the last weekly schedule. You can just pick relax for all of the days again, and then just keep mashing the Y button in order to skip all the farming parts. You should eventually fast forward it to the end and get the alone ending, which should get you that achievement for 80 gamer score. And also, because we made it to the end of the game with over $1,000, we should be good for the farmer achievement for another 80 gamer score. That should wrap it up for our main playthrough. However, we are going to have subsequent playthroughs, which we will be referring back to that save we made previously. So make sure you tune back soon for those, but that's going to wrap it up for this part. And that's all there is to it.